So hey everyone, today's video is going to be a little bit different than the typical content you expect from our channel and our podcast. But with the rise of Asian hate crimes happening in the US, Canada, and in many places across the world, we believe that it is really important for us to use our platform to discuss and provide resources for proper allyship.
This year has been super tough for the Asian and Pacific Islander community. With the COVID-19 pandemic, it's been racially associated, and certain people in influential positions have been spreading hate rhetoric, hate speech against people of color. We're seeing many cases where there's vandalization and defacing of Asian and Pacific Islander communities' property, which include places of worship, businesses, as well as homes.
Increased verbal and physical attacks on Asians globally, brazen attacks on the vulnerable and the elderly, where perpetrators are not appropriately apprehended, and the recent racially targeted shootings in Atlanta.
Racism against the Asian Pacific Islander community isn't something that is new. Systemic racism against people of color has been an issue for decades in American history. Specific historic Canadian examples include Chinese head tax, treatment of Sikh passengers on the Komagata Maru ship, the internment of Japanese Canadians, and so much more. So currently, actually, Canada has reportedly a greater number of anti-Asian racism reports per capita compared to the US counterparts. Racism against the Asian Pacific Islander community may also be difficult to identify, and it may seem normal to some people, very casual. And well, why is that?
One possible reason is the model minority myth. This is the assumption that Asians are socioeconomically better off than other minorities, which ignores and masks the large range of inequalities and disparity that exist within the larger Asian community. This way of thinking also divides Asians and other minority groups because many find it hard to accept that this economic privilege can coexist with their identities as minorities and people of color. Because of this, there is a perceived proximity to whiteness, which causes society to become desensitized to violence against Asians because they no longer see Asians as a vulnerable group. This causes a greater tolerance in racism within the community itself. Because of this as well, we sometimes may be told that at least the racism that we face and our struggles aren't as bad as other minority groups. This way of thinking is called the logical fallacy of relative privation. It is the act of rejecting an argument by stating the existence of a more important problem. It's like when someone says, well, at least racism in Canada isn't as bad as racism in the US. These type of conversations are distracting and take away from the main goal. We shouldn't be attacking each other, but we should be working towards dismantling the system that put us in this position in the first place. There's also this pillar that exists within the model minority myth that states that Asians worked hard to get to where they are, and if other racial minorities worked as hard, they would also gain and see an increase in their socioeconomic standing. But this is used by society to undermine and discredit Black struggles, implying that Black people need to work harder. This leads to an increased tolerance of anti-Blackness. Now, an important thing to recognize is that acknowledging and discussing anti-Asian racism does not negate other forms of racism. It does not erase the harms that we have inflicted on other communities.
There's this conception called the perpetual foreigner myth, and it's when naturalized and even native-born citizens, including families that have been here or been in another country for generations, and they're perceived as foreigner and other because they belong to a visible minority group. And this is obvious when people ask questions like, where are you from? No, where are you really from? And then if you still give them an unsatisfactory answer, they'll go, where are your parents from? Stuff like that. And Another unfortunate yet common occurrence regarding racial injustice is a lack of media coverage. It's very likely that there are many, many underreported cases because people being scared of approaching authority, etc. And then media coverage has also been biased due to aforementioned reasons.
So now you may be wondering, what can you do to help? Number one, increase visibility of racist acts by speaking up if you witness racism happening on the streets or online, and call it out if it's safe to do so. Holding others accountable to their microaggressions and prejudices. And finally, reporting incidents of anti-Asian racism. We'll be linking a couple of those in the description below, so be sure to check those out.
Other ways that you can help support and become an ally is firstly by donating to organizations, if possible, that are actively implementing measures to help those in the community in need, to set up preventative measures and reporting systems, etc., and as well as signing petitions because they increase the visibility of these issues, which is very important. And also, it's good to check up on your Asian friends and colleagues as well. Furthermore, the lack of education is often one of the reasons for ignorance. So we encourage you to read up on things like the history of present-day anti-Asian and Pacific Islander racism in both the US and Canada. There's also things you can do, which are learn how to pronounce the Asian names and understand that Asia includes many, many different countries and cultures and ethnicities. As well as look into doing some bystander intervention training, which would be very useful in many situations and in the current climate as well.
So we're going to be linking a number of resources in the description below, so please feel free to check them out and share them. Now let's take a moment to remember the victims of the Atlanta shooting.